In the second segment, we're going to give an introduction to minerals and focus specifically on calcium. I'm also going to bring in the controversy from Chapter 8 into this segment because it fits nicely with our talk about calcium. So what are minerals? Minerals are naturally occurring inorganic homogeneous substances and chemical elements. So there are both major minerals and trace minerals. So there are 7 major minerals, and these are major because they're required in amounts of greater than 100 milligrams per day. You also might hear them referred to as macrominerals, and the ones we'll talk about are listed here, and all of these are in your book as well. Trace minerals are required in amounts of less than 100 milligrams per day. Still very important, they're just required in lesser amounts, and they might be referred to as microminerals. Start with calcium. Calcium is the most abundant mineral in the body. 99% of the body's calcium is stored in bones and teeth, so you've probably heard about calcium being important for these reasons. So it plays a very integral part of the bone structure, and it also serves as a bank that can release calcium to the body fluids if there's a drop in calcium concentration within the blood. So calcium is very tightly regulated in the body. The other 1% of the calcium in the body is found in fluids that bathe and fill cells. So this 1% isn't very much, but it does a lot in the body. So this 1% is kind of small but mighty, so it's important for regulation of ions, or transporting ions, maintaining blood pressure, clotting of blood, muscle contraction, secretion of hormones, enzymes, neurotransmitters, and also helps to activate cellular enzymes for many processes in the body. So again, most of the calcium in the body is found in the bone, but this 1% that's found in the blood is very important as well. As I mentioned before, calcium balance is very tightly regulated, so all cells in the body really need continuous access to calcium. So that's why we have to have a constant calcium concentration within the blood. So there are 3 major organs that help to regulate calcium balance within the body. These are going to be the intestines, the kidneys, and then bone. So intestines are going to help increase absorption of calcium from the intestine. Kidneys prevent calcium loss in the urine, so when there's low blood calcium, we don't want to lose any extra, so kidneys are going to prevent that loss. And then whenever blood concentration is low, bones will also release more calcium into the blood. So really, the skeleton, the bones are really our calcium bank, as this picture here can help you to remember. Alright, so let's talk about calcium absorption and recommendation. So absorption changes throughout life, and depending on what we consume, we may not actually consume all of the calcium that's in a product. So as adults, we absorb about 30% of the calcium that is ingested, and we can actually only absorb so much calcium at a time. Different times of the lifespan or different diseases or states can affect absorption as well. So absorption of calcium actually increases during pregnancy. And then absorption also increases when calcium intake is low, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but when calcium intake is low, we need to maintain more concentration in the blood, so absorption is going to increase even more. The recommendations for calcium are 1,000 milligrams per day for adults between the ages of 19 and 50, and 1,200 milligrams per day for adults over the age of 51. So our needs actually increase as we get older. As I mentioned last week with the vitamins, you do not need to know specific RDAs, ULs, anything like that. This is more just for your reference. And the UL for calcium is set at 2,500 milligrams a day for adults. Calcium is found in milk and milk products, so that's the thing we automatically think of first. It's also found in dark leafy vegetables, but the amount in, say, like spinach, you are going to have to eat a lot of spinach to have the same calcium content that you would have in a glass of milk. So fortified foods are also a good source of calcium. So orange juice is often fortified with calcium. So that might be a good way to help meet your calcium needs. Bone changes throughout life. So I really like this picture from your book that shows, when we have this active growth stage, when we reach peak bone mass and then bone loss. So bone loss is inevitable, and it's just related to aging. So no matter who you are, you're going to lose some bone as you get older. But there are ways that we can protect bone loss. One of those is that we need to obtain enough calcium and vitamin D during childhood, so during this active growth period before we reach peak bone mass. This ensures that our skeleton is starting with a high bone density. When we get older and we have bone loss, this can result in osteoporosis, which is what the controversy for this chapter is focusing on. So around age 20, 25, 30 is when peak bone mass is going to be reached. And then around age 40 is when bone loss starts to occur. And this can eventually lead to osteomalacia and then osteoporosis. So moving into controversy 8, what about lifestyles and lifestyle factors and osteoporosis? So a little bit more about osteoporosis. An estimated 44 million people in the United States have or are in the process of developing osteoporosis. Most of these are women. That's not to say that osteoporosis cannot occur in men, but it's more common in women. So for women, adequate calcium and vitamin D intake are even more important. Some risk factors are listed here. We'll talk about these a little bit more, and you can read more about them in your book, but risk factors are going to be related to dietary intake, so of calcium and vitamin D, physical activity, not having enough of it, age increases our risk, gender, females again have a higher risk, and then genetics can also play a role. So how does bone loss occur? How does osteoporosis develop? So there are two types of bones. We have trabecular and cortical. So trabecular is more metabolically active, and when blood calcium is really low, that's when you start to pull calcium from the trabecular bone part. So this is the end parts of our bones. So we don't want to pull calcium from there because we really need the ends of our bones to stay strong. The cortical bone is the outer ivory-like bone that's found in the shaft, so that long part of the bone. And calcium can be withdrawn with here, but it's very slowly. So with bone loss, we have our loss of trabecular bone that begins to be significant around age 30. So the ends of our bones we're starting to lose from there. So that's where we might see a lot of fractures. So as you see in this bullet here, the fractures are common at the wrist and the hip. So where that trabecular bone, so those ends of the bones, start to lose calcium, they get weak, and we can can have fractures. Then loss of cortical bone is going to begin around age 40. You might have seen older women that kind of have a hump. This is called Dowager's hump. And again, fractures are also very common once we start with this bone loss. So what are some causes of osteoporosis or things related to lifestyle? So gender, again, we talked about females are at higher risk. And specifically with menopause. So hormones can affect bone loss. Estrogen can mess with bone loss or promote it even more. So there are some risk factors there, but women are at a higher risk. Again, if you're a man, it's still very important to have adequate calcium and vitamin D intake, but your risk is a little bit lower. As we said, bone loss doesn't discriminate against age, so it's inevitable. Everyone's going to lose a little bit of bone, but it's really, how much you lose, and based on your other lifestyle factors. So environmental factors also play a role. Genetics, race, and ethnicity play a role. So check those out in your book. As we talked about dietary intake, so having overall inadequate intake, but of energy in general, but specifically related to calcium and vitamin D. People who are underweight have a higher risk of osteoporosis. So that's not to say that overweight and obesity are protective, but you definitely want to be in the normal weight category because underweight can increase your risk of bone loss and osteoporosis. Physical activity helps to build bone. So if someone is very physically inactive, that can cause bone loss, lead to osteoporosis. Tobacco smoke and alcohol can promote bone loss. Protein, check out your book about this. So, too much protein can be bad or have negative effects. Too little protein can also have some negative effects. So it's really getting that protein need just right to maintain bone health. Sodium, caffeine, soft drinks, these are going to have phosphorus, which can basically break down bones. So again, it's watching how much we consume of those. And then other nutrients that we've talked about that play a role in bone health and just overall general health are related to osteoporosis as well. So your book gives much more detail about all of these factors. So take a look at that. I would definitely, think about for the exam, what gender you might see osteoporosis more likely in, some of the other major risk factors like age, body weight, dietary intake, how do those relate? How is osteoporosis detected, and then what do we do to treat it? So we have this thing called a DEXA. And it's this machine. This arm basically moves across someone, and it will print out, and show bone mass. It can also show us fat mass and lean body tissue in an individual as well. So DEXA is what's used to check bone status. Drug therapies can be used to treat, and then estrogen replacement therapy is also another treatment for osteoporosis. And again, we want to maintain adequate calcium and vitamin D intake throughout life to help prevent or slow that bone loss with age. All right, as far as calcium recommendations go, we briefly touched on this earlier in this segment, but adequate calcium intake is very, very, very important during your growing years to help achieve your peak bone mass, which we talked about, age 25, 30 is when your peak bone mass is achieved. So after that, it really is all downhill. So individuals who can't consume dairy products, which really are our best sources of calcium, should choose other fortified products, fortified with calcium and vitamin D. So dairy products are our best sources of those, but if you can't consume dairy, lactose intolerance or an allergy, choosing calcium fortified foods is important. So if you drink other kinds of milk like soy milks or almond milk, just make sure that they are calcium fortified. A supplement may be necessary, but focus on foods first because calcium is better absorbed from foods and don't exceed the U.S. So a little word about calcium supplementation. You want to look for elemental calcium. So the main ones you'll see are calcium carbonate and calcium citrate. Both of these are good if you need to take a supplement. Carbonates absorb more efficiently when taken with food, but calcium citrate does not have to be taken with food. So just some things to consider, but the carbonate is higher elemental calcium. So again, do some research, see what works best for you. Calcium supplements, what's nice about them is that they can be taken at any time of day. You don't have to take them, first thing in the morning or first thing at night or at the same time every day. But what is important is that your absorption is somewhat limited. So basically, if you're taking a dose over 500 milligrams, your body's not going to absorb all of that. So if you see a supplement that's 1,000 milligrams, it's probably best to divide that into 2 doses so that you're getting all of that absorption. So maybe you take it several times throughout the day. So 500 milligrams is really when our absorption of calcium is the highest. So if you want to relate that to food, a glass of milk has about 300 milligrams. So just some food for thought there as well. So that concludes our talks about calcium and osteoporosis. So we'll jump into more of the minerals in the next segment.